All right, welcome. Here we are. So we left off just kind of logging in a user, which is great. However, we obviously want to do some stuff with this logged in user and actually, deal with logging out and all these various other things. So let's start to figure that out. I think probably our next logical step, let's get this out of the way. Let's actually create in our auth service, a logout function. So we'll just go here. We can do future. It'll be, in theory, either a string or let's just do a bool for now. I'm not totally sure, but we'll have a logout function, which will be asynchronous. And we'll do some stuff with it. So logout is actually pretty easy. We just take our session manager, which again is just injected into this, like so. And we are going to run. It's not called logout, it's called signout. That's fine. We do, something could go wrong. Who knows? Who knows what could go wrong? So let's wrap it into try catch as usual. And in the case that something went wrong, we're going to return left of the error.toString. We can also print the error and print the stack trace, which is the second parameter of the catch. And here, what do I want to do? I guess we really don't have to do anything. We don't have to return like true. We just can rely on either being right. And in which case we can just now, if this all went well, we would just return right of null. Because we don't care, there's not really any data coming back. Now, for some reason, this is saying there's an issue. Because we're not, because I just wrote right. We have to return right. There we go. Okay, so we have a logout function now. So let's actually add a button to do this. So I'm going to create a whole new button. I'm just going to wrap our elevated button in a column so we can have more than one button. And we'll make main axis size dot min. And let's create another elevated button that is called logout. And we also need to have a child text log out. Let's also rename this one to say login, because that's really what we're using this for right now, and we don't want to be confused. And we'll just add a little size box with a height of 16, just to separate these guys. Let's see if that is fine. So we have login, logout. We can probably make this less. We could also, maybe while we're at it, just also create our register button. Oops. There we go. So I'll put this here, and this will actually do, this kind of code. And because we don't have the UI to capture it, we kind of have to do some funky stuff here. But let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of this, and let's just make this a register, so we can have a place just to test all these things. It's kind of like unit testing a little bit. Also, I thought I had a sized box on my clipboard. I did not. So let's make it super pretty for our temporary UI. Okay, so our login, we'll ignore register for now. Our login button will log in with this, which we know works, and then log out, we need to actually make it do something. So here we'll just go await ref.read auth service provider.logout. So let's just test to make sure this stuff works. Our server is still running, everything's good. So we will try logging in. Could not log in, and it's because previously we made the password to test an error, and I forgot to change it back. Log in. So we got our user here, right here, and if we log out, we're not going to see anything printed, but we didn't see an error happen. We can double check that. Let's just temporarily make something and print out what actually comes back from this. In theory, because we're not actually folding, we should see either right or left wrapped in something. So let's just test it. Log out, right, null. Log in, cool. Log out. So from what we can tell, it seems to be working. But we need a way to actually, essentially have some UI or something saying like, hey, I'm logged in right now, so we can really test this. So let's figure out the best way to do that. All right. So what I'd like to do is kind of have a global singleton, basically a notifier in Riverpod that will be tracking the current logged in user at any given time. So we do already have an auth service provider, which is a provider meant to just really talk to the service we've created, the client. But we also just want an auth provider. .dart. Okay, this auth provider, we are going to create. We're going to be using Riverpod, and we're going to be using, I don't think we've done this yet in this video, but we're going to actually make a generated notifier. So to do that, we just need to give it a name. Now we don't want to call it auth provider because this is going to generate code, and the word provider gets appended to the generated code, so it would be called auth provider, which doesn't make sense. So we're just going to call it auth, and it's going to extend something called auth. This is very much like freezed if you've used it. This doesn't exist yet, but our generated code will make it. Now in order to tell Riverpod and our generator to generate code, we actually are going to go Riverpod like this. Now, in this case, we'll actually use uppercase Riverpod because it allows us to pass in something called keep alive. And keep alive true means even if we're not at the moment watching or listening to this, it's still going to stay in memory. And something like our auth, who's logged in, is something we kind of always want to, be able to get at any given time. So we want to keep alive true. Another thing we have to do, because this is going to generate a new file, is essentially going to create a file as a sibling to this called authprovider.g.dart. We need to say this is a part of that file, or that file is actually a part of this one. And to do that, we just go part authprovider.g.dart. Now, in here, we also need a build function, and that's just part of a Riverpod's notifier. And this will all make sense a little bit later. And for now, let's just, so we can get the code generation working, let's just say it's going to be a string. This is essentially what denotes what kind of data is going to be stored in here. Now, it won't be a string when we actually get this working, but for now, we're going to say a string, and our build function has to return, in that case, a string. So let's just say test. So I'm going to save this file. Now, what we need to do is actually run our generator. A couple ways to do this. You can, of course, run it in terminal. And I always forget the command for this. Let's see if I can remember it. Let's just go to the Riverpod docs real quick, just to remember the command. And then I'll show you an even better way to maybe do, not necessarily better, but an alternative way. Riverpod docs. Oops. Riverpod docs. Let's search for the word, or I can just probably catch it with my eye. Generator. About code generation. Let's see if this. Come on, give me an example of how to run this. Okay, here we go. Dart build runner. Oops. Here, let's go to the build runner package, which is really what's being used. Riverpod is just hooking into this. So what we want to run is, so we will go in our Flutter project, Dart, make sure I do this right, Dart run, just following this right here, build runner. And there's a couple other things we want to include. One of them is delete conflicting outputs. That way, if there's some kind of conflict, it will just use the latest one instead of trying to merge them or something like that. I think that's all we need. Let's just try it. So in order to use this, you do have to have build runner installed, and there was an error here, so I'm going to see, because there's still one more command we need to do. We need to actually run the word build. Build is the command. So we're using Dart run build runner being the package, running build runner's command build, and then we're applying the delete conflicting outputs, and that should work. So here, in order to do this, you do have to have the build runner. We did do that in the very first real video, first coding video. And you'll see I have as a dev dependency build runner. And that was part of the Riverpod installation instructions. But you might already have it if you're using freezed or various other things that use code generation. Now, something about code generation, since we're talking about it, it might be a thing of the past soon. I really hope so, because it is slow. It can get in the way. It's annoying. But it is like a great solution compared to what exists in Dart right now. However, things like macros and metaprogramming is being figured out right now. There's some sort of like samples about it in some of the unstable branches and stuff like that. And what it's going to mean is the compiler itself will be generating this code, meaning we don't have to actually generate Dart code per se, and that's going to be a good time. And I know Remy, who created Freezed and created Riverpod, I know also at least in Freezed, he's already kind of, I think, figured out how the metaprogramming is going to work in there. I've tried to play with it. I haven't had any luck, but it'll be really cool. And I imagine he'll bring it to Riverpod as well. And Serverpod, I've heard them talk about that they are looking into it too for when it's ready. And that means we wouldn't have to run the Serverpod generate. All that stuff would just happen at the compiler level. Okay, so we ran it. Now, another thing when we're running it that we could do is we could also run watch, which is something I like to do, especially when I know I'm going to be making some changes. And although this takes the same amount of time the first time you run it, now it's hanging out and waiting, and it's only going to run it when I make changes, and just changes, it'll only do the affected files. You'll see we have an error here. So we're going to go at override, because we're actually overriding something. And you'll see this got generated. It's this, all this like code, which, you know, inherits this other thing. We don't have to worry about this generated code too much. But this is just a nice way to work. Okay, so our auth notifier is, right now we have it set, it's going to be like a string. And let's just see kind of how this works with a string, you know, just to kind of explain how stuff could work. So let's go to our main.dart. We already have this wrapped in consumer. We have access to ref. So we could actually put some text here, okay? We could have some text, and we can actually get access to it by going ref.watch, and we want to watch our auth provider, not our auth service provider, but our auth provider. And you'll see this is fine because ref.watch auth provider, because it is the type string, we can just pass it right into the text. So let's actually refresh this, go back to our app, and you see the word test here. And if I was to change this to test123, however, this will require a rebuild because this is something that happened right at the start. We should see test123. Now, say we wanted to make a way to actually update this. We can make a function in here called, you know, update text, and we can maybe allow a string to be passed in called text or whatever. And all we do is we go state equals this new text, just like that. And this will replace the state. It will also notify the listeners and everything like that. So we'll save that. We'll go back to our main.dart, and let's actually in our, maybe I'll make another button just called testing fun. Oops, fun. And say we want to call that, what we have to do is ref, instead of ref.watch, we want to use ref.read because we're not actually, we don't want to subscribe to things. We just want to be able to talk to this notifier itself. So we still do it kind of the same way where we're going to go auth provider, but we don't actually, if we just did this, we're not going to have access to that update function that we made. Let me make sure that's what I called it. Update text, we don't, because this right here is a string. If we want to speak to the class itself or the instance of the singleton, we actually have to do ref.read authprovider.notifier, and then you should see that we have update text. And here we can pass in some text. So let's say hello world. So I'll save that. Let's just save everything. And now we still have test123 because that was the initial, but we can click testing fun and you'll see it changed to hello world. So that's, you know, how this kind of works. If you've used block and qubits before, a qubit is very much, very similar in my opinion to a notifier. They work a lot the same kind of way where you can build like your own little API within it and do things. So it's a nice pattern, and we're going to be using this pattern a lot. Okay, all that being said, this obviously isn't what we want to be storing. We're not going to be storing a string. What we want to store is their auth state. We're going to create a way to do this. Where do I want to put this? I'm going to, yeah, we're going to, you know what, maybe we're going to make kind of a model. Yeah, I'd say it's a model. We might rename models to state. I realized after kind of thinking about this more, we're actually probably rarely going to be using models folder like I would normally do in a normal app because our models are actually coming from Serverpod. Like we worked with our user already. We didn't actually have to create the user on this end. So I'm going to instead use models for like, our custom models, but we're not going to actually have to have a user model or a venue model or a event model or all the things we're going to have in our lovely app. So we'll just use models. This might change to state if we are using it a lot. We're going to figure it out as we go. But what we're going to call this is authState.dart. And authState, we're going to create a sealed class called authState. And we're also going to mark this as immutable, which is a nice way to do things, meaning you can't change this. What sealed means is because we're going to be creating, I'll explain sealed in a moment once we kind of have something together. But we need a constructor here, so we're going to do const auth state like that. Okay, cool. We have this thing called auth state, but it's kind of useless. It's just this little thing. But what we're creating now are things called final class. We're going to use final class, and we're going to call it auth state booting, which is like when we're just kind of like booting up the app. And what we're going to do is we're going to extend auth state. And we just need these like this. So that's one variant of our auth state. It's basically a state we could be in where we haven't even done anything yet. Maybe the app's still loading. We haven't checked if the user's logged in or anything like that. So I like to have that as like sort of, a whatever. Then, which is a little bit different than initial, which this would be, I'm a guest essentially of the app. I haven't actually logged in, that kind of thing. We're also gonna have a loading state. So that's when, we're checking, we're calling our service, and maybe we show a progress bar in that state. The next one that we want is in terms of auth, because remember when someone registers, we're going to need to be like, oh, we're in this state where we need them to send a verification code. So let's make a state for that. Let's call it verification code required. So it's kind of like we're waiting for that text message or email or whatever to come through. Did I spell that right? No, I didn't. Verification. Yep. Okay. So we'll have that. We're also going to have a success. Hey, it worked. And we're also going to have a failure or error. Let's call it error. I like error. Now, what's cool is for all of these, I mean, they're pretty basic, like booting, initial, loading. There's not really any parameters associated with it. It's either loading or it's not. It's not like we're not going to have like a progress bar, like, oh, it's loading 10%, 50%. So that's fine for those. But for things like success, there's some extra information we want to add in here. And we're going to, for instance, we're going to require whenever we create an auth state success, we're going to require that user to be passed in. So we'll do user just like that. Which is, again, our custom user model, right? That it's not the user info model, but it's the user itself. Which, yeah, that works fine for me. We're going to have to make some refactors to make that work. Now, we do have to override our constructor here by basically requiring this to be passed in. And we could do it this way, or we could do it with required like this. And I think this is just a little bit cleaner, so we know what we're passing in. Same with error. We can do something where we pass in a string called error, and we'll just do const and required this dot error. That way we can show a particular error and all that kind of stuff. We could also maybe have maybe there's like a title and like a more detailed message, whatever. But this is totally fine for now. Now for verification required, there is also some parameters we want to capture. And this is really just to make the user experience really nice. One thing I really hate in signing up for a new app is like, say I register, I create my password, everything's good, and then it brings me to a friggin' page where I have to log in. And it's like, registering an account to me is also, you should just get logged in at that point. Of course, after, maybe clicking an email. But what we want to do is we want to make it that when we actually get the user to register, they type in their code, we can just log them in after. And we need basically a way to store that in memory. So therefore, on our verification code required, we are going to require just the email to be in here and the password. And similarly, and I can do this, I think, with this quick fix by creating this. And we'll just do a const here as well. And you'll see it created this, for us, the email and password. So basically when we change the state to being, oh, now we're ready for the code, we're going to put this stuff in here so that when we then go, okay, now we're going to change it to success, we can then use that. So that's kind of what I have in mind there. All right, so now let's go back to our auth provider. We'll keep this open. I'll make this. So we don't want to return a string. We want to actually return auth state. So let's import that. And of course, we can't return a string here. So what we want to actually return is auth state booting, just like this, because that's when the app actually starts. Now notice we're not actually returning auth state here, right? We're returning auth state booting, which is a totally different class, but it's not. It's extending auth state. So as long as we are using a class that is extending it, we are fine. Now I mentioned I would talk about sealed. and immutable and stuff like that. Immutable just means we can't take a current version of this and change something in it. We have to construct a new one, and that's just nice. And that's generally how you want to work with especially in state management. You always want to be creating a new instance of something, not just like updating it so that notifiers get notified and all that kind of stuff. That's what immutable is. Sealed is interesting and pretty new in Dart, and it means we can't, I can't go in here and go and make a final class, let's call it like auth state testing, and go extends auth state like that. I actually can't do that. Even though I can do it here, I can't do it in another file because it's saying it can't be extended, implemented, or mixed in outside of its library because it's a sealed class. So this is just a nice thing to do so that maybe you start working with another dev and they put something in a different file. It basically forces things to be all in the same place, which makes sense. You don't really want this code spread out. You want a one source of truth. Okay, here's the different states. You can, of course, add another one. So that's one of the solid principles, a piece of the solid principle. So yeah, that's what sealed means. So I'm going to now save this, and we get this. And now we have an error here because it's saying string can't be assigned. We're actually just going to get rid of this because we're not actually going to work with it that way. And let's go to our main.dart, and we're going to get rid of this code here. We'll still keep our testing fun. We might have some other fun stuff to test. All right, so our auth provider now. So it's going to start in the booting phase. What do I have? I have another error. Oh, because we're also watching that, which we can't just put a string. Okay, so what's going to happen is this is going to boot up and we'll be in this initial state. But immediately when this first initializes, we want to essentially do something. And I'm going to create an internal function, meaning using an underscore here, private function called init. And we can take this and we can go command period, probably control period on Windows, and we can create a method called this. Now, our init function is actually going to be something that is asynchronous, so it'll be future. Not going to return anything, and a lot of the time, in pretty much exclusively, I'd say most 90% of the time, any of our methods within our notifier shouldn't ever return anything. They're really meant to modify and mutate the state and replace the state, essentially. So it's a future void. It's not going to return anything. So what we want to do in here is we need to essentially initialize and make sure our session manager is up and running. So let me just figure out the best way to do that. We have a session manager provider. Session manager provider. Oops. So yeah, the first thing we want to do essentially is initialize the session manager. And we can do that. But when I say the session manager, I'm talking about Serverpod session manager. So we can get access to that. And what's cool is anything inside a Riverpod provider, we're going to have access to ref. You'll see this is our normal, like, ref notifier state, whatever. And we can do things like this, ref.read, just like we're doing in the UI. And we can take our session manager provider, and we can actually run .initialize. Now we're having this. So this is something we might fix at some point. There is a linter warning with Riverpod when you install the custom linter that, hey, like if you're using generated classes, you should only you should be using generated classes everywhere, essentially, if they want to talk to each other. Which I understand, and I think in a complicated situation that makes sense. I think for our case, it really doesn't matter because this session manager provider isn't a notifier or anything. It doesn't have any crazy logic. It's really just a singleton or like a reference to a singleton. So I think it's fine. I'm going to do a little more research on this to see the best way to do it because I don't think there's a way to actually make this generated because it's just a provider. But I'm going to do some more research, but we could just ignore this. And I'm actually going to go quick fix ignore for this file because I don't like to see those squiggles. But I understand it. I understand what it is. I'm not just ignoring it completely. All right. What's next? So that will initialize. And what do we do now? Well, so we initialize it. Then we want to actually see if they're logged in. And in order to do that, we have to actually open up our auth provider again. Our auth service provider, no, sorry, our auth, what do we call this? Our auth service, the service itself. And we're actually going to create a new thing here. So we have login, we have register with email. confirm, log out. This one I'm actually going to put right at the top. This will be a future either string as usual, or in this case, user info. However, we might, yeah, actually, this is what we want to do, I think. And we're going to call this current user. And actually, we're going to make it a nullable current user, or user. It's async, and there we go. So in here, we are going to take our session manager dot, I think there's something called current user session manager dot signed in user. Here we go, signed in user. All right, so we have our signed in user, and we actually are going to, this could be null. Yeah, there's not really a reason this could ever go wrong. We could decide to, no, I still think it's fine for the current user to be null. So really we're going to just return right of this, and everything's fine. So we're never actually, in this case, I don't think there's a reason to worry about this. It's also not actually asynchronous, so we could actually, get rid of the future. This is just something that is there. All right, cool. Let's actually, I feel like something could go wrong, like maybe if the session manager hasn't been initialized yet. So let's actually do a error and return left e.toString. And similarly, although we're going to add logging at some point properly, we're going to also just print this stuff, which is nice to do early on. Okay, so we might, maybe an error could happen. The string error, cool. Okay, so after we initialize it, and we actually, I believe, is this asynchronous? It is. So we're going to await this, and just so it happens, and then we can actually, in our auth provider here, get our current user. So let's go final result equals await, and here we can go ref.read. What is this called again? It's our auth service provider dot current user. And actually, we don't have to await this, right? It's not asynchronous. So this is cool, and we can then fold on this. So we can go result.fold and deal with that potential error that went wrong. So let's just go like this. Let's print error, and we'll just do this. Super nice. And then this would be user info right here. Now this could still be null, which is fine. So we want to now check if user info equals null. We're going to take our state and change it to auth state initial, because it's like, okay, they're just like a guest. We could even maybe rename initial to guest possibly. And in fact, let's do that. Let's do that. Let me finish just making this code proper. Oh, something failed because I didn't have a semicolon. Let's save. We'll come back to this in a second. And let's go to auth state. So instead of initial, let's actually call it auth state guest. So that's someone, because our app is going to allow a lot of the functionality, at least the read-only part of the app will, work for guests, essentially, non-authenticated users. So what I just did there, I did it kind of just without thinking about it. Rename symbol. This is just a nice tip. Instead of like having to change it and search your whole project, VS Code will automatically rename it, but it won't just replace that word. It will actually look for how they're connected and communicate with each other. And that's not just a Dart specific thing. So let's actually kind of, just because it makes more sense to me, let's do it this way. So if user info does not equal null, we'll go state.equals auth state success, because we had a success. And look, we now are expecting a user to come into here. Now, we don't have user yet. We actually just have the user info. And I think it would be helpful just to have the user here. So really what we kind of need to do is also get access to that. So we can go, I'm kind of making this up as I go, ref.read auth, user service provider dot, user service provider dot, don't we have like dot me. Okay. So now we can go final user equals this. Now this is going to get a little bit messy because we're going to be folding within a fold, but it's still fine. So let's call this user result. And maybe we rename this, and I can do this here too, right? Rename symbol. I can call this user info result, like that. And we'll get we'll get me there. and we'll call this user result, and then we will essentially go user result.fold, and here we might have an error, and we're just going to basically make, I guess, oh, we forgot to do this. We want to go state equals auth state error and pass in that error, and that's the same thing we want to do here. In the case that it went all fine and good, oh, we also have to await this. This is asynchronous, which means that this function itself, this looks a little bit messy right now. As soon as I actually get this together, and I think I can just by maybe having that. No, yeah, okay, it's a little bit prettier now. I'll walk through this in a minute because it is a little bit messy. User alt.fold, otherwise, if there is actually a user in this case, so you'll see this should be a user itself, then this is when we actually would make the state success, so that we actually can pass the full user in. And the user itself is nice because it actually has access to that user info within it, so we'll be able to have both. Okay, so essentially what's happening here, because I know it's a little bit confusing, in the init function, we initialize, and then we check to see who the current logged in user is from Serverpod and Flutter's perspective. If we somehow get an error, we're just going to go to auth state error and show this error. If we do get no error, we check to see if it's not null. In the case that it's null, it's cool. They're just an auth, everything's good. You're just a guest. We don't know anything about you, But if it's not null, then we go off and we search for, and we actually get the user itself, not just Serverpod's user model, but the user that we made in the last video. And then we have to fold on that too, because something could have gone wrong, many things. And if there's an error, we just go back to auth state error like we did here with this new error. If we get the user, we go to auth state success. Okay, cool. So that's kind of it there. Now, the thing is, this isn't just going to, just having this code is not enough to actually make our app essentially call this. We need something right during essentially during our startup process to actually call this. There's a few ways to do it. I'm just going to close some things because it's getting a little unruly. And let's go to our main.dart. Now we are doing some stuff right in here. My app. I kind of want to just make a couple changes here that will just make our life better. My app. Actually, no, this is fine for now. We're going to end up replacing all this anyways, but what I'm going to do is we're going to convert this to a stateful widget. I don't really like stateful widgets when I don't need them, and I try not to ever use them for state unless it's something that can be just its own compartmentalized widget and doesn't make sense to use a whole provider for. But this is a good place to do it because we're not actually going to use it. We're not going to use the stateful widget for its state. We're going to use it to have its life cycle. And we have access to something called a init state when this goes. And inside our init state, we are actually going to essentially run some code that essentially initializes the thing. Now, the problem is we don't have access to ref in here because this isn't wrapped in a consumer or anything like that. But we can fix that by, instead of using a stateful widget itself, we're going to use something called a consumer stateful widget, which comes with Riverpod. So we'll just change this to consumer stateful widget. Then we also need to, instead of this being called state, it's just called consumer state. Okay. Now the create state will take my app state, but it's not actually going to be of type state. We need to also say it's a type consumer state. So now that we do that, we actually have access to ref. So we can actually go ref.read, and we can use our auth provider, which again is just the file we were just in. When we have generated code, it brings you to the actual generated instance, which makes sense. And we just click one more time to get to the actual code. There we go. So just by reading it, we could, in here also, if we wanted to, and actually, you know what, maybe this is a nice way to do it. Let's actually make this a public. So I got rid of this. And we can actually run the initialization in here just to make sure everything is good. So I'm going to make a new function here, also called init, and we're going to call, we have to call it to the notifier, and we're going to call init in here. The reason I'm doing this is I want to make this asynchronous so that we can await this from happening. And in here, we of course have to call the init function. Now, if we want to get really fancy, which I think I do, and this is something we'll probably update and make better, we will use just a small amount of state here. We're going to say, I'm just going to make a Boolean called booting equals true when this first comes. And what we can do here is after this is done, we can set we can use set state and say booting equals false. That way in our, essentially in this right here, we can do something different. So let's say, if booting, this is where we might have like a splash screen or something. So let's just return like an empty scaffold with a body, with a center, child, circular progress indicator. Whoop, whoop, whoop. So if it's booting, we do that. Otherwise, we return this. So let's save everything. Let's do a full green arrow refresh. Chances are I missed something. Like, this is not simple. There's probably something missing here. Okay. Okay, sorry, I need to, in order to actually see this, we kind of have to do something like this so I can see what happens. So let's just do a green arrow rebuild. It looks like stuff maybe worked. So let's just look at our debug console. We didn't see any errors. Let's just go through here because we might be wrong. Let's just print out a few things temporarily. I'm just going to print some numbers. We got here, we got here, we got here, and let's just print out the user here in case we have it. We'll undo all those changes. So let's do a green arrow rebuild again. Okay, so we got to 1, it went to 2, it went to 3, but then nothing happened because I guess we're not actually, logged in from Serverpod's point of view. So let's just try logging in. So we logged in, cool. Let's do a refresh here. There we go. So because we are logged in and have that saved in the session or in the local storage, and that's all being done for us under the hood, we don't have to think about it. It's keeping us logged in. Yay. Okay, so I'm just going to get rid of our little consoles here, console logs, our print statements. And now let's actually just do a bit of UI here. So what we can do right across here is we can go if, actually, probably a good practice here is we're going to make something called logged in user. Again, this is just temporary ref.watch. And here we want to watch our auth provider. Now, actually, this isn't logged in user. We'll just call this auth state. And then we can do something. This is usually nice to do in a builder in this context, but again, this is just temporary code just to explain stuff. Let's just make a builder. And in here, we can actually do a switch on the auth state. And new switch statements are actually really nice because we can actually just go case auth state. Let's do auth state success. Right here, we can return text that says, hello, user. Let's do case auth state guest. Return text, hello, guest. And all other cases, we can just do a default and maybe just return text that just says dot, something like that. Just to really show if this works. Okay, so we have our auth state.watch, auth provider, success, cool. Let's see what happens here. So we have hello user, so we're getting here. Now what's really cool, because we're already in this case, we can actually get access to the user itself. So we can go auth state.user. Let's just do, well, bio we don't know, we don't have anything, but I can go .userinfo. Let's use the username. Is that something? Yeah, something we have username. Hello user. So we can do this, which is kind of cool. Let's just save that. And now we see hello user Tyler 3. Now you'll notice if I try and do this same thing down in guest mode, Dart and VS Code is smart enough to be like, that doesn't exist because there is no user on auth state success. It's only on auth state guest. So that's just a really nice, I don't know, it's really nice being able to do this. So there we have hello guest and we have hello user. Now let's see, we might have to do one more thing to make this work, but let's just try logging out. So logging out, okay, everything's fine. Let's refresh, which I know is not ideal, but we see we are a guest now. So the last piece of this puzzle, I believe, and this will then be a good time to wrap up, is we need a way when someone logs out to actually essentially update our auth provider to say this user no longer exists. So in order to do this, we can actually, let's see. Actually, there's two things we need. So we have our auth provider right here. So we have our initialization. Let's just do something called future, and this will be a void. Actually, this won't even be a future. Let's just have something will be void, and it's going to be called set user. I might rename that, and it will require us to pass in a user here. And when we call this from outside of this file, we're just going to make state equals auth state success and pass in that user. And let's just do something called log out user. Again, we might rename that. And here we go state equals auth state guest when they log out. We don't have to go back to booting because we've already booted it up. We just go back to the guest one. Okay, so now in order to work with this, we will go to our auth. Best place to do this probably in our auth service provider. That's the, sorry, in their auth service itself. Actually, no, this is not the best place to do it. We need to do a bit of a refactor here. I realized we are because we're calling our service stuff directly in our UI, which I know is just temporary. The actual service itself doesn't have access to ref here, and we don't want to pass that in. That's a bad practice because it's not actually a provider. So what we really need to do here is essentially move this code to our auth provider in some way, shape, or form to really like get this going. So let's see if we can figure out a good way to do this. So let's do current user. Without duplicating stuff, I'm just trying to figure out the best way. It might actually, we have access, the auth provider. Okay, we could try, I'm just going to try something and we'll see if this breaks everything. Now, this still makes sense because this is returning the data. I think we do kind of want to actually duplicate some stuff here in some sense, but these will be void return right. Yeah, because I'm sort of doing this nice blend between clean architecture and simple MVP. I'm just trying to find where that balance is to make this work. I still want these to I'm just going to try something. Okay, current user we get from the service. Because basically what I want to do is make sure when we log in, well, when do we call? This might actually be fine the way I'm thinking about it. Let's just see, where do we do login with email? So we have this, we have the result. Yeah, result of, okay, we're going to do it this way for now. I might give this some thought and refactor it. But really what we can do here is we can go ref.read and take our auth provider and go auth provider, sorry, .notifier, and go set user and pass in, oh, wait, this doesn't even get us the user info back, does it? Okay, I'm going to give this some thought on the best way to actually handle this and clean it up and stuff, and we'll circle back on that in the next video. But technically, like aside from the state changing between it, we do have some pretty good stuff working here, right? Like we have this, we have hello guest. We go to log them in, and we have to do a refresh to actually see the state change because of what we have to do next. But we have this. And when we log out, of course, we have this. So I'm going to give this some thought, just the best way to sort of like combine these things together while still keeping like the service and provider kind of separation. And we'll come back to that next. But yeah, we're looking pretty good here. I know auth is boring. I kind of hate doing auth, but doing it properly right at the start is kind of required. So much of our app is going to rely on the fact that there's a user posting something, right? Or a user creating an event or RSVPing to an event. Like we kind of need it. We can't just like fake it and build our app. So by the next video, we'll be, I think, out of auth hell, as I like to call it. There'll still be more to do in auth in the future. Like we're going to add, Google stuff and Apple stuff for signing in and all these other great things. But this is what it is. Cool. And yeah, shout out to big fan right here, Eamon. He's a big fan. He's messaged in the live chat of the version of this. as a reminder for people watching this on YouTube, I am streaming this on Twitch as I'm creating it and editing them down for YouTube, just cleaning them up, that kind of stuff. And that's mostly because I need time to, if I don't do it that way, I feel like it's going to just take forever because I'm going to like restart and be like, that wasn't very good, let's redo it, you know, that kind of thing. And doing it live, it's a little bit of pressure to like just get it done. And I do want to remind people, like I have on the YouTube side, sign up, be a member. We have like a Discord and stuff. You're able to get access to this code as we're building it. You know, various other perks, and it's going to grow, and it's going to be a cool community and mentorship and all that kind of stuff. So click that little membership button, join. I've kept the price, you know, I think reasonably small. So hope I can see you there. And if not, you know, just like, subscribe, share, all that stuff, you know, really helps. This is a big series. This is going to be a lot of work for me. And you know, I'm excited to do it. I'm obviously doing it. So I could use all the support to, you know, help this thing actually get to the finish line. And yeah, with that, I'm going to call it a day, and we'll see you in the next video.